A man born on a poor, angry island somehow became emperor of France and made almost every great power in Europe reorganize its plans around him. He was not born into a major royal house. He did not inherit a huge kingdom. He started as an awkward Corsican boy with an accent of temper and a lot of ambition. And within a few decades, kings were panicking, armies were collapsing, and Europe was asking the same question again and again. How do we stop Napoleon Bonaparte? This video was made possible by NordVPN. Stay safe online by using the link below for a huge discount on a 2-year plan with a risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. And while you are there, grab the little corporal character pin before it sells out. Also, a big thank you to the patrons. Head over there if you want benefits like Discord access and maybe a bit of behind-the-scenes content. Now, back to the tiny baby who arrived with a very large future. History loves conquerors with grand origins. Alexander the Great was the son of a king. Julius Caesar came from an old aristocratic family that claimed divine ancestry. These are the kinds of backgrounds people expect from men who reshape the world. Napoleon did not begin that way. His story begins on Corsica, an island that was not exactly the center of European power. In the early 18th century, Corsica belonged to the Republic of Genoa. Then Corsica tried to break away and declare independence. Genoa decided this whole island problem was more trouble than it was worth, so it passed the problem to France. France bought the island, and just in time, Napoleon was born French. Many Corsicans were not exactly thrilled about their new rulers. Napoleon grew up with strong anti-French feelings, especially in his younger years. His father, however, decided to adjust quickly to the new reality. He embraced the French connection, which created tension between him and his son. Napoleon looked at his father and saw a man willing to bow to the people who had taken Corsica. He mocked French habits, French manners, and French aristocratic style. But his father wanted the family to rise. The Bonapartes were minor nobility, not rich or powerful, but noble enough to give Napoleon a chance. His mother had a different kind of influence. Napoleon adored her, even though she was strict and often punished him harshly. She was the disciplinarian of the family, and Napoleon respected strength wherever he found it. His parents wanted a better future for him, so Napoleon was sent away from Corsica to military school in France. It was not a comfortable beginning. He had a Corsican accent. His family was not wealthy. He was surrounded by boys from better backgrounds. And Napoleon did not make life easier for himself by arriving with a friendly personality. He was proud, defensive, and openly resentful of the French. Naturally, he was bullied. His classmates mocked how he spoke and where he came from. But Napoleon did not simply collapse under it. He learned to fight back. He spent a lot of time alone reading about the great commanders of the past. He became fascinated by men like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. While other boys chased status and comfort, Napoleon studied. He was especially good at math and geography, which made artillery a natural path for him. At 16, he graduated and became a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment. For most people, that would have been a respectable achievement. For Napoleon, it was not enough. He wanted more. The problem was French society. Before the revolution, talent could only take a man so far. Rank and privilege mattered more. Promotions often went to men with the right family name, not the right ability. A young officer like Napoleon could be skilled, ambitious, and intelligent, but still find himself trapped beneath men who were simply better connected. What Napoleon needed was a complete political earthquake, and then France gave him one. The French Revolution exploded. The old hierarchy was attacked. Noble privilege was challenged. The king's power was broken. The streets filled with violence, speeches, slogans, fear and hope. Heads fell. Institutions collapsed. Everything that once seemed permanent suddenly looked fragile. Napoleon did not love every part of the revolution. He was not exactly a romantic believer in mob rule, but he understood what it offered him: opportunity. If the revolution destroyed the old order, then men could rise through talent, and Napoleon had talent. He began defending the revolutionary government. At Toulon, he helped defeat a British-backed counter-revolution and earned promotion. Later in Paris, he helped crush a royalist uprising and rose again. His military ability became harder to ignore. Before long, he had his own army. For a young man from a minor Corsican family, this was an almost unbelievable rise. The door that had been closed by aristocratic privilege had been kicked open by revolution. Napoleon walked through it. But he also wanted social status, and he believed marriage could help. Around this time, Napoleon began looking for a wife. If some accounts are to be believed, he was not exactly smooth. He had poor luck with women, and many were not interested. Then he met Josephine. She was older than him, She was a widow, she had children, she was in debt and needed stability. Napoleon was rising fast. The arrangement made sense. So they married. Napoleon fell deeply in love with her. Josephine, however, was less overwhelmed by romance and more interested in survival. She also had a reputation for being quite familiar with other men. Napoleon soon became the subject of jokes, because many people seemed to know Josephine a little too well. Worse for him, while he loved her intensely, she fell for another man named Hippolyte. But Napoleon did not have much time to sit at home and worry about his marriage. Europe was already in flames. The French Revolution terrified the monarchies of Europe. If France could overthrow its king, what would stop peasants elsewhere from getting ideas? Austria, Prussia, Britain, and others feared that revolutionary France would spread chaos across the continent. France did not exactly calm them down. Instead, France declared war. The War of the First Coalition began, and France found itself fighting much of Europe. At first, the French struggled, but revolutionary energy, mass mobilization, and new leadership helped turn the tide. French armies began pushing outward, conquering territory, and creating sister republics that spread revolutionary ideals. In 1796, France planned a three-pronged campaign against Austria. Two major armies would attack from the north. Napoleon, leading the army in Italy, was meant to be more of a distraction in the south. But Napoleon did not see himself as a distraction. The army he received was hungry, demoralized, underpaid, and poorly equipped. Napoleon gave them speeches, promised them victory, and turned their misery into motion. He took them into Italy and immediately transformed the campaign. He was outnumbered, but he was fast, aggressive, and clever. One of his great talents was splitting his enemies apart and defeating them separately. He knocked Sardinia out of the war and forced the Austrians into retreat. At the Battle of Lodi, Napoleon put himself in the middle of the action. He aimed cannon himself, got covered in mud, and earned the respect of his soldiers. When he ordered a dangerous assault across a bridge, under heavy resistance, his men followed him. That mattered. Napoleon understood that soldiers would do extraordinary things for a commander they believed shared their danger. At Lodi, he showed them he was not just giving orders from a safe distance. He was there with them. As he moved through northern Italy, some Italians welcomed him as a liberator from Austrian control. But liberation came with French domination. Napoleon took wealth from conquered territories and sent riches back to France. He also paid his soldiers, many of whom had not seen decent money in years. The Pope had supported Austria, so Napoleon also moved against him briefly. Soon, Napoleon was approaching Vienna. Austria was exhausted and had to make peace. Napoleon oversaw the negotiations himself. He had effectively knocked Austria out of the war. And he was only 28. In the Italian territories he conquered, Napoleon created French sister republics. He wrote constitutions, organized governments, and behaved not just like a general, but like a political architect. When he returned to France, he was a hero. That made the government nervous. Napoleon was popular, ambitious, and surrounded by soldiers who adored him. So the government decided it might be wise to send him somewhere far away, preferably somewhere he could win glory without standing too close to Paris. The answer was Egypt. The idea was to threaten British access to India and damage Britain's global position. Napoleon liked the thought of glory in the East. He brought not only soldiers but scholars. Egypt had ancient monuments, mysteries, and opportunities for propaganda. At first, it looked dramatic and impressive. Then British Admiral Nelson destroyed Napoleon's fleet. Then an Anglo-Ottoman force defeated him at Acre. The campaign became far less glorious than Napoleon had planned. So Napoleon abandoned his army and returned to France. That sounds bad because it was bad. But Napoleon understood propaganda. He had newspapers and public messaging that made him look successful, even when the reality was messy. He commissioned paintings that presented him as heroic, calm, and grand. So when he got back to Paris, many people still greeted him as a savior. Then he had another problem, Josephine. Napoleon had learned about her affair. He was furious and humiliated. But he also had his own affairs, so the moral situation was not exactly clean. Still, his marriage survived, at least for the moment. Then, politics came calling. An influential politician approached Napoleon with an idea. The French government was weak, unpopular, and unstable. Why not stage a coup? Napoleon liked the idea very much. The plan was to convince the government that a dangerous plot threatened them, move them to an isolated palace outside Paris, and then pressure them into giving up power. With Napoleon's troops nearby, the setting was not exactly neutral. The coup itself was chaotic. The politicians were confused. Napoleon's soldiers were confused. Napoleon himself did not seem fully in control. But his brother Lucien, who was president of the lower house, helped rescue the situation. The remaining councilmen were pressured into creating a new constitution. A new government was formed with 3 consuls. At least officially, there were 3. After Napoleon had finished adjusting the system, only one consul really mattered: the first consul, him. Over the next few years, Napoleon concentrated more and more power in his own hands. He became, in practice, the ruler of France. He was only 30. Now he had to prove he was not merely a great soldier, but a great leader of a state. Meanwhile, France was still at war. While Napoleon had been in Egypt, France continued spreading revolutionary governments. Piedmont, Switzerland, Rome, and other territories had been pulled into France's orbit. European powers saw a chance to attack while Napoleon was away, and the War of the Second Coalition began. This time, Russia joined Austria and Britain against France. At first, France suffered badly, but Russia eventually pulled out after getting bogged down in Switzerland. And now Napoleon was back in control. He took command of the Army of the Reserve and moved against Austria. One reason Napoleon was so dangerous was surprise. In 1800, he appeared to be preparing for operations in one direction, but instead moved his army through the Alps toward Italy. This crossing became legendary. The famous painting shows Napoleon on a rearing horse, heroic and majestic among the mountains. In reality, he crossed on a mule. But heroic paintings are not about strict honesty. They are about making the boss look cool. When Napoleon emerged in Italy, the Austrians expected him to relieve the siege of Genoa. Instead, he struck toward their supply line near Milan, forcing them to confront him at Marengo. At first, the Austrians badly beat the outnumbered French. They thought they had won. Then French reinforcements arrived, and Napoleon struck back. The battle turned. Austria was defeated. After General Moreau's victory at Hohenlinden, Vienna was exposed again. Austria made peace again. The War of the Second Coalition ended as another French victory. Officially, it was France's victory. In practice, it felt like another Napoleon victory. Only Britain remained at war. Britain used its powerful navy to blockade French ports and interfere with neutral shipping. Other countries were angry because British sea power disrupted their trade. They formed a league to defend neutral rights. Britain responded by attacking Copenhagen. The league collapsed. Britain's economy was under pressure too, and in 1802, Britain and France signed a treaty. For the first time in years, Europe was at peace. Napoleon had risen from outsider to commander, from commander to ruler, and now he had secured French gains in Europe. But one question remained. Could he govern? Military victories were one thing. Running a country was another. France had been through years of revolutionary chaos. Governments had come and gone. The economy was unstable. The legal system was confused. The state needed order. Napoleon gave it order. He created a national bank. He reformed currency taxation and welfare systems. He reorganized administration. He dealt with corruption. He improved infrastructure. He reshaped education so that ability mattered more than birth. He also created a centralized legal code, the Napoleonic Code, which organized civil laws into a clearer system. But his reforms were not pure liberty. He preserved some revolutionary principles, especially equality before the law for men. But he rolled back rights for certain groups. Women lost legal independence, and husbands gained strong authority over wives. Napoleon wanted order, and his version of order was deeply patriarchal. He also made peace with the Catholic Church. During the Revolution, the Church had been attacked and weakened. But many French people still considered themselves Catholic. Napoleon understood that fighting the Church forever would create instability. So he reached an agreement with the Pope. Catholicism returned, but under limits. The Church would exist, but it would not dominate the state as before. Napoleon also allowed freedom for other religions, and is often noted for his relatively positive treatment of Jewish communities at a time of widespread anti-Semitism. But this was not simply kindness. Napoleon believed religion could help keep society stable. He saw it as useful. His larger aim was clear: end revolutionary chaos and build a stable, prosperous French Republic under his control. He was popular. He was effective. And he was absolutely not humble. Napoleon declared that the revolution was over, then added that he was the revolution. His confidence could be seen from orbit. Of course, not everyone was happy. Conservatives thought he was too radical. Radicals thought he was too conservative. But Napoleon was now a dictator, so opposition could usually be crushed. In 1804, after failed assassination attempts, Napoleon decided he needed an even stronger position. First Consul for life was not enough. He wanted a dynasty. He wanted permanence. He would become emperor. A vote was held asking the French people if they supported the idea. The result was an extremely convincing 99.9% in favor. Surely nothing suspicious there. On December 2nd, 1804, at Notre Dame, Napoleon was crowned Emperor of the French. The Pope attended, but Napoleon made one thing very clear. This was not the Pope giving him power. Napoleon lifted the crown and placed it on his own head. The message was simple. He made himself emperor. Now the monarchs of Europe had a new problem. A Corsican upstart had risen from revolution, defeated their armies, reorganized Europe, and crowned himself emperor. He had also made himself king of Italy. The old royal houses did not consider him one of them. They saw him as a threat, an insult, and a danger. Britain had already gone back to war with France before Napoleon became emperor, because both sides were violating the previous treaty. Napoleon occupied Hanover and began planning an invasion of Britain. But there was one massive problem. Napoleon's army could probably defeat the British on land, but it had to get across the English Channel first, and Britain ruled the sea. That reality would shape much of the Napoleonic Wars. Britain and France were deadly enemies, but direct land combat between them was limited because the Royal Navy protected Britain from invasion. Britain did have another weapon: money. It could pay other countries to fight Napoleon. Austria, Russia, Naples, and Sweden formed the Third Coalition against France. They hoped this time they could finally push Napoleon back. They were wrong. The War of the Third Coalition showed Napoleon at his best. Another key to his success was speed. He reorganized his army into corps, each functioning almost like a small, independent army with its own infantry, cavalry, and artillery. These corps could spread out, move quickly, live off the land, and then come together when needed. Napoleon could cover huge distances, confuse his enemies, isolate them, and strike before they understood what was happening. The coalition needed Russia and Austria to join forces. If they combined, they might be dangerous. Napoleon needed to prevent that. He did. In a matter of weeks, he moved around 200,000 men in secret and surrounded Austrian General Mack at Ulm. Mack's army was trapped and captured almost without a major battle. Napoleon later said he had destroyed the Austrian army simply by marching. Then he turned toward the Russians. The Russians began retreating. This was dangerous for Napoleon because his style depended on fast, decisive victories. If the war dragged on, more enemies might join the coalition. So Napoleon set a trap. He knew Tsar Alexander I was young and hungry for glory. Napoleon made himself appear weak and vulnerable. He positioned his army at Austerlitz and even abandoned the high ground to lure the Allies in. The Allies took the bait. A thick fog covered Napoleon's center. The Allies saw what appeared to be a weak French right flank and moved down from the heights to attack it. That was exactly what Napoleon wanted. Then, French forces burst from the fog and smashed into the Allied center, climbing the hill and splitting the enemy. The Allied army collapsed. Some men fled across frozen lakes, and Napoleon ordered artillery to fire on the ice. An unknown number drowned. Austerlitz was Napoleon's masterpiece. Austria was forced to make peace once again. After France also conquered Naples in 1806, the War of the Third Coalition ended in another Napoleon victory. Napoleon punished Emperor Francis of Austria. Austria had to surrender territory, pay compensation, and promise not to fight Napoleon again. Russia, Sweden, and Britain remained at war, but none could immediately stop him. Napoleon then strengthened his grip on Europe. He placed family and friends in control of conquered territories. In Germany, he created a new confederation under his protection. This erased Austrian influence in much of Germany. Emperor Francis accepted reality and dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, an institution that had existed for over 1,000 years. But Napoleon did not win everywhere. At sea, Britain remained dominant. Spain had allied with France in 1804 because Britain had attacked Spanish ships. Napoleon hoped that the combined French and Spanish fleets might eventually help him invade Britain. Then Admiral Nelson struck at Trafalgar. Nelson used a bold tactic, breaking through the Franco-Spanish line and unleashing devastating fire. The British victory secured their control of the seas. Nelson died in the battle and became a legend. Napoleon's dream of invading Britain was effectively dead. But peace on the continent was not secure either. Prussia watched Napoleon's growing influence in Germany with alarm. The Prussian king, Frederick William III, came under pressure to act. Napoleon had created a confederation in what Prussia saw as its sphere. He had also played diplomatic games over Hanover. In October 1806, Prussia joined the fight and declared war, beginning the War of the Fourth Coalition. This was not a wise move. Prussia had a proud military tradition, but its army was outdated. Worse, it acted before properly coordinating with its allies. Prussia sent Napoleon an ultimatum demanding that he withdraw his forces from Germany. Sending Napoleon an ultimatum was generally not a great life choice. He moved quickly to destroy them. At the twin battles of Jena and Auerstedt, the Prussian army was crushed. At Auerstedt, Marshal Davout's heavily outnumbered corps defeated a much larger Prussian force. Napoleon pursued the fleeing enemy, relentlessly took Berlin, and within a single month, shattered Prussian power. Frederick William and the remains of his army fled east. By then, Napoleon's troops were tired. Winter arrived. Conditions became miserable. Napoleon expected both sides to settle into winter quarters. Russia decided otherwise. The Russians launched a winter attack leading to a series of brutal battles. The worst was Eylau. Fought in blizzard conditions, men froze, deserted, and died in terrifying numbers. Russian artillery tore into the French. At one point, Napoleon himself was at risk of capture. The French army was saved by a huge cavalry charge, led by Murat, Napoleon's flamboyant cavalry commander. After so much blood and suffering, both sides paused until after winter. When fighting resumed, the Russians were pushed toward Friedland. There, General Bennigsen made a serious mistake. He positioned his army with the Allier River at his back. Napoleon saw the opportunity. French artillery pinned the Russians between the river and concentrated fire. Many soldiers drowned while trying to escape. The Russian army was badly beaten. The War of the Fourth Coalition ended in another victory for Napoleon. Again, Europe had tried to stop him. Again, Napoleon had outmarched, outmaneuvered, and outthought his enemies. From Corsica to the throne of France, from bullied schoolboy to emperor, from artillery officer to master of Europe's battlefields, Napoleon had risen faster than almost anyone in history. He had broken coalitions, humbled Austria, crushed Prussia, beaten Russia, and forced the old powers of Europe to take him seriously. But every victory created new enemies. Every humiliation planted revenge. Every conquered state became another place that might one day rise against him. Napoleon had reached extraordinary heights. The real question was how long one man could keep all of Europe under control.